Have you ever walked away from a conversation, feeling deeply confused, unable to clearly explain what just happened, as if something subtle was off, yet somehow you still ended up blaming yourself for the discomfort you felt? Like there was something wrong in the interaction, something you couldn't quite name or identify, but instead of questioning the other person, you turned inward and assumed that you were the one who misunderstood everything. What if I told you that this kind of confusion isn't random, that it doesn't just happen by accident, and that in many cases it's being planted slowly, intentionally, and strategically inside your mind? Because the truth that most people never realize is that gaslighting doesn't begin with obvious lies or aggressive manipulation, but rather with tiny distortions, subtle changes in reality, and almost invisible psychological shifts that gradually reshape how you see yourself and the world around you. And before you even notice what's happening, you begin questioning your memory, your judgment, and eventually even your own sanity, without realizing that this process has been carefully built over time. So let me ask you something and really think about this for a moment. What if this is already happening to you right now, and the only reason you haven't recognized it yet is because the manipulation is designed to be invisible? Today you're about to discover the 7 signs that you're being gaslighted, and the most unsettling part of all is that most people don't recognize these signs until they are already deeply trapped in the cycle. Let's get into it. The first sign is deceptively simple, yet incredibly dangerous, and it shows up when you begin to constantly doubt your own memory, even in situations where you once felt completely certain about what actually happened. Think about how many times you've caught yourself saying things like, "Wait, did I remember that wrong?" Or maybe I misunderstood what was said, even when your initial perception felt clear and accurate. At first, this might seem completely normal, because everyone forgets things occasionally. But the problem begins when this doubt becomes frequent, persistent, and tied specifically to interactions with one particular person. Because when someone is gaslighting you, they intentionally make you question things you were once absolutely sure about, using phrases like, "That never happened," "You're imagining things," or "You always twist the story," until your confidence in your own perception begins to erode. And slowly, almost without you realizing it, your trust in your own mind starts to fade, and once that trust is weakened, you become significantly easier to influence, manipulate, and control. Because if you no longer trust yourself, then who do you start relying on to define reality for you, if not the very person who is manipulating you? It's not really about winning arguments or proving a point, but about destabilizing your sense of clarity and making you question what is real. They might contradict themselves within the same conversation, change details halfway through a discussion, or deny things they said just moments earlier, creating a sense of instability that keeps you off balance. And when you try to point out these inconsistencies, instead of addressing them, they dismiss your concerns by saying that you're overthinking, being dramatic, or misinterpreting the situation. At that point, your focus shifts away from what actually happened, and instead becomes centered on trying to figure out what's real and what isn't, which is exactly the psychological space they want you to be in. Now let's talk about the 4th sign, which often disguises itself as feedback or criticism, but is actually a way of undermining your emotional reality. And that is when you start believing that you are too sensitive. You may hear phrases like, "You're overreacting," "It's not that serious," or "You're too emotional," repeated so often that they begin to shape how you see yourself. But the truth is that gaslighters are not interested in understanding your feelings or validating your experience, because if your emotions are acknowledged as valid, then their behavior becomes questionable. So instead of addressing the issue, they minimize what you feel, dismiss your reactions, and subtly train you to believe that your emotional responses are exaggerated or incorrect. And over time, this leads you to silence yourself, suppress your reactions, and avoid expressing how you truly feel, not because your emotions are invalid, but because you've been conditioned to believe they are. But here's something to think about. What if your feelings are not the problem, but actually the warning system trying to alert you that something isn't right? Now the 5th sign begins to affect your everyday life in ways that are easy to overlook, but deeply impactful, and that is when you start struggling to make even simple decisions. At first it might not seem connected, but the link becomes clear when you realize that constant self-doubt eventually erodes your confidence in your own judgment. You begin questioning small choices, overanalyzing simple situations, and constantly wondering whether you're making the right decision. or about to make another mistake? Thoughts like, what should I say, what should I do, or am I overthinking this again, become part of your daily internal dialogue, and before you know it, you're second-guessing everything, not because you lack the ability to decide, but because your confidence has been slowly dismantled over time. This is not accidental, it is a direct outcome of prolonged manipulation, where your sense of certainty is gradually replaced with hesitation and doubt. Now here's the sixth sign, and it's one of the most dangerous because of how quietly it develops, and that is when you begin to feel isolated from others. Gaslighters often create distance between you and the people around you, sometimes in obvious ways, but more often through subtle suggestions and emotional manipulation. They might say things like, your friends don't really care about you, or your family doesn't understand you like I do, planting seeds of doubt about your relationships. In other cases, they may create conflict that pushes you away from others, leading you to withdraw on your own, without even realizing why. And once that isolation sets in, you lose external perspectives, you lose validation, and you lose the ability to compare your experience with reality. Without someone to say that's not normal, or that doesn't sound right, the manipulation becomes harder to recognize and easier to accept as truth. So think about this carefully. When was the last time you had a completely honest, unfiltered conversation with someone you trust? If you struggle to answer that, then it might be more significant than you think. And now we reach the seventh and most dangerous sign of all, the point where the manipulation becomes internalized, and that is when you start believing that you are the problem. Not occasionally, not in isolated moments, but consistently, where your default assumption becomes that you are too emotional, too dramatic, or too difficult. You begin thinking things like, maybe I am overreacting, maybe I exaggerate things, or maybe I'm the reason nothing works, even in situations where that isn't objectively true. This is the final stage. Once you fully believe that you are the issue, the gaslighter no longer needs to actively manipulate you. As you begin doing it to yourself, you silence your own thoughts, question your own reality, and hold yourself back without needing external pressure. And the most painful part is that you genuinely believe this is your fault, even though it was never yours to begin with. But here is where everything can begin to change, because awareness is what breaks the cycle. And the moment you start recognizing these patterns, you begin taking your power back. Not instantly, not all at once, but gradually, as you shift from questioning yourself to questioning the behavior that caused the doubt in the first place. You begin trusting your instincts again, noticing patterns you once ignored, and seeing interactions with a new level of clarity. And that's when the dynamic starts to shift, because manipulation loses its power the moment it is seen clearly. However, there is something important that most people don't want to face, and that is the reality that recognizing gaslighting is only the first step. The real challenge comes afterward, in the decisions you make once you are aware of what is happening. Do you continue to ignore the signs, justify the behavior, and stay in the same cycle? Or do you confront the reality you've been avoiding and start making changes? Because staying in that cycle always comes at a cost, and that cost is your confidence, your mental clarity, and your sense of identity. And the truth is that nothing is worth losing those parts of yourself. So let me leave you with one final question, and it's one that only you can answer honestly. How much longer are you willing to doubt yourself just to keep someone else comfortable? Because the moment you stop doubting yourself is the moment everything begins to change. And if something in this message resonated with you, if something made you pause and reflect, then don't ignore that feeling. That feeling is awareness. And awareness is always the first step toward taking your life back.